in court in Pretoria.
It was incredible, Alec, from 11 o'clock till 5 o'clock, and probably the best legal minds in the country. There was altogether about 16 senior advocates, 16 silks arguing this point from various parties.
And these are the guys who cost 20,000 plus an hour.
Yes,
so COSATU's got a big bill because they lost it with costs.
What
does that mean?
That means that the party that loses the application need to pay the legal cost of the other parties. Now there were 4 other parties. Each had at least 3 senior counsels briefed and acted in court. And remember, some of them was only briefed Saturday night after 10. And that also, some of them stated in court that they got the call Saturday night and were briefed after 10 o'clock to appear in court the next morning and start arguing from 10 o'clock onwards.
Just by way of a little bit of background, it goes back to November last year when at that point in time there was an agreement between Vodafone, which is one of the biggest cell phone companies in the world, and Telkom, that Vodafone would buy 15% of Vodacom, which we know in South Africa is about half the market here, from Telkom, and then the rest of the shares that Telkom owned in Vodacom would be distributed to Telkom shareholders. That was November last year. They informed ICASA, the regulator, the parties involved, that this is what they were doing. In their opinion, they didn't have to get approval from ICASA. ICASA went along with it until Friday afternoon, at which point ICASA said, oops, we might have to call public hearings into the matter. COSATU then went to the court to get an urgent interdict to block the listing today, and that was the episode that Theo Vorster is now recounting to us. What were the major arguments? The
major argument from COSATU's point of view was that the ICASA needed to receive an application, and that application needed to be approved before the unbundling and selling of Vodacom shares could actually take place. So they say that ICASA erred when they regarded the letter from Telkom that they don't need approval was actually accepted as a fait accompli. The second point was that because of the fact that ownership or control changed hands, that specifically within the Act that they needed to approve the transaction.
And the response?
Well, the response was twofold. The response was first, and I'm not talking about some of the other parties, but the first response from the Department of Telecoms was very strong. They say there's a contract in place here. That contract stipulated that there to be certain agreements in place between government and the buyer of the shares, which was in place. The money was paid, 51 billion rand was paid to Telkom as part of the transfer. And secondly, this was not ownership or control changing hands. This was about 15% of the shares. Already 50% was held by Vodafone, not nothing. And the fact that this was a piecemeal selling process and almost a distribution of shares did not in effect mean a change of control, although it will mean that government's control will be less. But then government does not control all the shares in Telkom.
The government stake is going to go down to 14%. The Public Investment Commissioner, which presumably is only an investor, will go down to just over 6%. And this will be in a larger, offshore controlled Vodacom, which Vodafone itself will control 65%. Theo, we're going to bring Harold Parkendorf in now. He's a political analyst. Harold, it does appear to the outsiders that COSATU was perhaps emboldened by the election result, and this could be an early test of how close COSATU is to Jacob Zuma, the new president, remembering that Jacob Zuma has been traveling all over the world to try and tell foreign investors, don't worry, things aren't going to change in South Africa.
Well, I think there's a slightly different take on this. I mean, you touched on it on your earlier interview, but the question why ICASA changed its mind so late must be, if I may use a modish word, interrogated. It is surely unusual that they only came to that decision 3 days before the actual listing. That is, I would almost say unacceptable. It almost shows that complete lack of competence at ICASA, or it means there was some other influence that I can't determine right now. But I do think that COSATU does have a legitimate interest in for their members, saying, there's going to be a lot of loss of jobs, and we're concerned about that. I understand that Vodacom now said no, there won't be any loss of jobs, but maybe they should have, for political reasons, have said that earlier. But I think there's a second leg to this which doesn't get enough attention, and that is the almost moral question from COSATU: how can so few people in the Elephant Consortium get so much, like 6 billion rand, basically, not quite for free, obviously, but basically for free? And, is that the right thing to do in a declining economy? And the second one is, many, if not all, but most of the people in the Elephant Consortium are Mbeki loyalists, so there may be a bit of a backbite in that. But it's also, I think, the broader background is that broad-based economic empowerment is moving away from just enriching the few to including the many. And so empowerment is not just about transferring assets, but also transferring skills. I think it all